Hey everybody, I hope you're doing well. Welcome back for our fourth online lesson. Today we're going to talk about healthy eating. So last lesson we talked about healthy body weight and how to maintain a healthy body weight, and we said that one of the best ways to do that is actually to eat the right things. So the big question is, what is healthy eating? Right? You hear from experts all the time about what healthy eating is, and none of it really sounds the same. There's a lot of different trains of thought about what it means, but we're going to look at this very scientifically. We're going to look at things that are research-based, and we're going to really stick to the basics of healthy eating. So, first of all, what is nutrition? Nutrition is a science, okay? Again, research-based. It's a science that investigates the relationship between how we function and what we eat. Okay, so what do we put in our body and how does it allow us to function? Nutrients then are the parts of our food that actually sustain us. What do we have to eat to physiologically sustain us? So if we put those together, we could say that healthy eating is a balance of energy or calories and nutrition needed to sustain proper functioning and a healthy body weight. Another way to look at this, a very simplistic way to look at healthy eating. Putting things in our body that allow us to function well. Okay, so what do we eat and how is it allowing us to function? Here's what we need to understand. Healthy eating is different for everybody, right? So some people might have food intolerances. Some people might have different caloric needs or things that they like or dislike. So healthy eating isn't cookie cutter. It might be different for every single one of us, but it means that we're putting things in our body that allow us to function well. So let's talk a little bit about calories. We talked about metabolism last class. So calories are simply the amount of energy that we get from our food. So what do we eat and how much energy is it giving us? There's 4 different calorie sources. So first you have carbohydrates. For every gram of carbohydrates, you actually get 4 calories. That's the same for protein. Okay, so every gram of protein gives you 4 calories. Fat actually gives you 9 calories per gram. So fat is your most energy-dense nutrient. If you're taking notes as you listen to this, I would encourage you to write that down. Fat is your most energy-dense nutrient. It gives you the most energy per gram. So I said there were 4 calorie sources. I gave you 3. The last one is something that we don't consider a nutrient, but it is a calorie source. It's actually alcohol. So alcohol actually gives you 7 calories per gram. But remember what the definition of a nutrient was. A nutrient is something we have to physiologically sustain us. Contrary to popular college opinion, alcohol is actually not considered a nutrient. We don't have to have it to physiologically sustain us. So although it does give us calories, it isn't a nutrient. So how many calories do we need? That is very dependent on quite a few things. Your age, your biological sex, definitely your activity level, your body composition. But you can see on this chart some very basic ranges. So most of you are probably between 18 and 22. So take a look at this chart. Maybe you need somewhere between 1,800 and 3,000 calories depending on your activity level. So you can see that up until about age 30, caloric need increases, and then it starts to decrease just a little bit. So why do you think caloric needs decrease as we age? If you think back to last class, I said something drives your metabolism, right? Metabolism is just the number of calories we burn in 24 hours. So what did I say drives your metabolism? I said that muscle mass drives your metabolism. After the age of 30, we go through something called sarcopenia. Sarcopenia is an age-related muscle loss. We certainly can combat it some with strength training, but it's just an inevitable part of the aging process. So as your muscle mass decreases as you age, your caloric needs decrease a little bit as well. So again, nutrients are the things that we have to sustain us. And there's 4 things that we actually consider macronutrients. Macro meaning large, so things that we need large amounts of to sustain us. So those are carbohydrates, fats, protein, and also water. Okay, so water is not a calorie source, but we still need a lot of it to sustain us. So we do consider it a macronutrient. Your micronutrients are things like your vitamins and your minerals. We don't need a lot. Maybe we only need trace amounts, but you still have to have them to function. So they're still considered nutrients. So let's start with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are by far your most controversial macronutrient, right? Because what do most popular diet plans tell us to do with carbohydrates? Should we eat a lot of them? No, they tell us to cut them out, right? Don't eat bread, don't eat pasta. It's really bad for you. It's certainly going to make you gain weight. That is not the truth. We need to think about first of all, what carbohydrates are, and then also what do they do for us? So let's start there. Carbohydrates give you energy for everyday activities. They are metabolized very quickly. They give you efficient energy. If you are doing any high intensity exercise, anything we would consider anaerobic or without oxygen, your body has to use carbohydrates. Carbohydrates don't require oxygen to be converted to fuel. So for any high intensity exercise, you have to use carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are your brain's favorite source of energy. Okay, your brain wants to use carbohydrates for energy. So we really need to have carbohydrates. No carbohydrate diets are actually pretty impractical. So instead of cutting carbohydrates out entirely, we want to think about, okay, what types should we actually be eating? There's 2 types. You may have heard this before. We have simple carbohydrates and we have complex carbohydrates. And the difference is actually kind of what it sounds like, right? So simple carbohydrates give you energy very quickly. They're digested very quickly and they cause your blood sugar to rise very, very quickly. Okay. Generally speaking, these are processed foods, generally speaking. Complex carbohydrates are things that take longer to digest. Typically, they contain fiber. Typically, they're foods in their natural state. When we're looking at simple and complex carbohydrates, we often talk about something called the glycemic index. And this ranks food on a scale from 1 to 100 based on how it affects your blood sugar levels. So take a look at this chart. Foods high on the glycemic index, or your simple sugars, spike your blood sugar very, very quickly. That's that line in red. So it's going to give you energy quickly, but that energy certainly isn't lasting, and it may cause you to crash, may cause you to be hungry pretty quickly after. Your low glycemic index foods take longer to digest. Again, they typically have fiber. They give you energy for longer, right? So look at that orange line. The spike in the blood sugar certainly isn't as quick, but it provides energy for longer. So some things that are low glycemic index are things like apples, strawberries, non-starchy vegetables, beans. Whereas you can see the things high on the glycemic index are things like white breads, white rice, white potatoes. So oatmeal is actually a really good source of complex carbohydrate. So take a look at this nutrition label and think to yourself, how do I know this is complex? So there's a couple things that clue us in. So first of all, let's look at the total carbohydrates is 27 grams. But if you look down at the sugar, it's got a really low amount of sugar. So this isn't coming from those simple sugars. So that's a really good clue that this is a complex carbohydrate. Also, it contains fiber. Typically, complex carbohydrates are the ones that contain fiber. So check your labels, right? Know how to read your labels. That's an important thing. So what kind of carbohydrate should I eat? You might be surprised that about half of your daily calories should come from carbohydrates. right? That sounds like totally contrary to what popular diet plans tell us, but it should be about half of your calories. Now, you don't need half of your calories to come from bread and pasta. Think about fruits and vegetables. Those are a good source of complex carbohydrates, or carbohydrates in general. So eat lots of fruits, lots of vegetables. Those are really good sources of carbohydrates. You want to choose things that are whole grains and also things that are high in fiber. Okay, fiber helps to reduce chronic disease. Fiber also helps to regulate your digestive system. So we want to limit. We want to limit things that are considered refined, and I'll talk about what that means in just a minute. You also want to be careful of added sugars. Food companies love to add sugar into everything, right? High fructose corn syrup, cornstarch, those are just sugar aliases. So check your labels. Things that you wouldn't even think should have sugar in them often have sugar added in. So let's talk for a second about the white bread versus the whole wheat bread. Right? What's the difference? Why is one better than the other? I think all of us can look at this picture and know that we should gravitate towards the whole grain. But why is that? So white flour product has gone through a process called refinement and enrichment. So if you look at the picture at the bottom, your whole grain contains bran, germ, and endosperm. Now, in the refinement process, they actually take out the bran and they take out the germ, and they only leave the endosperm. So why would a food company do that? Well, it changes the texture of the bread, makes it a little bit more appealing, right? Makes it nice and light and fluffy rather than kind of the fibrous whole grain. But when they do that, they're taking out the best parts, the most nutritious parts of the wheat. So by law, the FDA comes in and they say, hey, you've taken out all the best parts, so you've got to add something back in. So any refined flour is enriched by law with iron, niacin, thiamine, riboflavin, and folic acid. So even if you picked up a package of Oreos that has refined flour, it's still going to have some micronutrients because by law it's enriched. On the other hand, you have your whole grains. They're naturally higher in fiber. They have a lot more micronutrients, about 30 more naturally occurring micronutrients. And research shows us that they reduce the risk of chronic disease. So when you choose your products, look for whole grain and whole wheat as the first ingredient. Make sure the word whole is there. If it says wheat, if it says multigrain, if it says honey oat, it may be refined and enriched. You need to check the label. If the first ingredient is enriched flour, put it back, look for one with whole grain.